My name is Margaret Holloway, and I'm 68 years old. For 40 years as a head nurse in Denver, I trusted my mind completely. But now, a strange fog is clouding my thoughts, making me doubt my own memory. My son, Ethan, a pharmacist, and his wife, Victoria, are pretending to be worried. Their solution is a daily special vitamin to help me think clearly, but my instincts as a nurse told me something was deeply wrong. I pretended to take their pills, but secretly I had them tested. The lab results confirmed my worst fear, haloperidol. It's a powerful antipsychotic drug used to control people. They weren't just waiting for me to become confused, they were poisoning me to steal my home and my fortune. They thought they were tricking a helpless old woman. They forgot they were dealing with a nurse. And they just handed me the proof I needed to destroy them. The fog came in wisps at first, thin and translucent like ghosts of smoke, curling around the edges of my thoughts. I'd be in the middle of reading a passage in a novel, the words clear and sharp one moment, then blurring into meaningless symbols the next. I'd find myself standing in the kitchen, the refrigerator door open, with no memory of what I had come for. These were small things, the kind of lapses people dismiss with a sad smile and a pat on the arm. "It happens to all of us, Margaret," they'd say, but I was 68, not 98. And more importantly, I had been a head nurse for 40 years. My mind was my most trusted instrument, a finely tuned machine that could recall drug dosages, patient histories, and complex procedural steps under immense pressure. This was not normal aging. This was an invasive, alien presence. My son, Ethan, and his wife, Victoria, saw it as an opportunity. They had been circling my life like well-dressed vultures ever since my husband, Arthur, passed away 2 years ago. Arthur had been a geologist, a man who saw the world in layers of time and pressure. He'd left me financially secure, more than secure, with a portfolio of investments and this beautiful, sprawling home in the Denver foothills that he had designed himself. It was a house of stone and glass and cedar, built to withstand time, a fortress of our shared memories. To them, it was just an asset. "Mom, the house is just so much for one person to handle," Victoria would say, her voice dripping with a cloying, insincere sympathy. She'd run a perfectly manicured finger over a dusty bookshelf, a silent judgment on my perceived decline. "All these stairs, the garden, we worry about you." Ethan, my son the pharmacist, would nod in agreement, his expression a carefully constructed mask of filial concern. "She's right, Mom. We've been talking. Maybe it's time to consider a nice, managed community." "Something simpler." "I am simple, Ethan," I'd replied, my voice sharper than I intended. "I like my garden, I like my stairs. They keep my legs strong." But lately, even the stairs felt like a challenge. A tremor had started in my left hand, a faint but persistent fluttering that made it difficult to hold a teacup steady. My balance was off. Last week, I'd stumbled on the landing, catching myself on the banister just in time. The fog in my head had swirled thick and heavy that day, and for a terrifying moment, I couldn't remember if I was going up or down. Their visits became more frequent. They'd arrive unannounced, bearing groceries I didn't need and advice I didn't want. Victoria would immediately start tidying up, rearranging my throw pillows, her movements conveying a sense of ownership, as if she were already measuring for new drapes. Ethan would guide me to Arthur's favorite armchair, the worn leather one by the bay window, and speak to me in slow, placating tones. "How are you feeling today, Mom? Really feeling?" he asked last Tuesday, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "I'm feeling tired, Ethan, and a little fuzzy," I admitted. It was a mistake. Any admission of weakness was ammunition for them. Victoria, who had been listening from the kitchen, swooped in. "Fuzzy? Oh dear, that's the word you used last time, isn't it?" "It seems to be happening more often." She exchanged a meaningful look with Ethan. "That's why I'm here, Mom," Ethan said, pulling a small, unlabeled white bottle from his jacket pocket. "I was talking to a colleague, a specialist in geriatric cognitive health. He's developed a new vitamin blend, a special compound. It's supposed to be wonderful for mental clarity, for the fuzziness." I looked at the bottle. As a nurse, every instinct in me screamed red alert, unlabeled medication. A special compound. Vague, unsubstantiated claims. It was the kind of thing you warned patients about, the snake oil sold on late-night television. "What's in it?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "Oh, a proprietary blend. B vitamins, ginkgo, some powerful antioxidants. It's all perfectly safe. He gave me a sample for you to try." He twisted the cap off and shook a single, chalky white pill into his palm. It was large, larger than any vitamin I'd ever seen. "Here, take it with your water. Let's get you started on the path to feeling better." He held it out to me. Victoria stood behind him, her arms crossed, her expression a mixture of feigned patience and predatory anticipation. They were watching me, waiting. My mind, foggy as it was, cleared for a moment with a jolt of pure adrenaline. This felt wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. They were too eager, too insistent. My years on the hospital floor had taught me the art of sleight of hand, of managing a difficult patient without them even realizing it. I took the pill from his palm, my own hand trembling slightly, which I hoped they'd attribute to my condition. "Thank you, dear," I murmured. "You're always looking out for your old mother." As I brought the glass of water to my lips with my right hand, I used my left hand to seemingly steady it. In that fluid, practiced motion, the pill was transferred from my right fingertips to the palm of my left hand, which then dropped casually into my lap, hidden in the folds of my cardigan. I took a long, slow swallow of water, making sure to gulp audibly. "There," I said, handing the empty glass back to him. "Down the hatch." Ethan beamed, the relief on his face so profound it was almost comical. "That's my girl. You'll see, Mom. In a few weeks you'll be sharp as a tack again." "I can't wait," Victoria added, her smile not reaching her cold, calculating eyes. "We just want what's best for you." They left soon after, promising to return the next day with my next dose. I waited until I heard their car pull out of the driveway before I opened my hand. The white pill sat in my palm, an ominous, silent threat. It felt heavy, dense. This was no vitamin. My hand was shaking again, but this time it wasn't from the mysterious ailment. It was from rage. A cold, clear, Arctic rage that burned through the fog and left my mind stark and lucid. They thought I was a doddering old fool. They thought my mind was gone. They thought they could drug me into submission, have me declared incompetent, and sell off my life for their own convenience. I looked around the room, at the photographs of Arthur and me on the mantel, at the shelves filled with books we'd read together, at the sunlight streaming through the window he had designed to catch the morning rays perfectly. This was my home. My life, my mind, and I was going to fight for it. Carefully, I wrapped the pill in a small piece of tissue and placed it in an empty film canister I kept for my garden seeds. I hid it at the back of my sewing box, a place they would never think to look. Tomorrow, Ethan would bring another pill, and I would palm that one too. I would collect them, these little white soldiers of their betrayal, but I needed more than a collection. I needed proof. I needed an ally. My fingers, clumsy with the tremor, fumbled with my phone. I scrolled through the contacts until I found the name, Dr. Javier Ramirez. He had been a resident at my hospital when I was head nurse, a bright, kind young man who had always treated me with respect. Now, he was the head of gerontology at Denver General. He owed me a favor or two. I'd covered for him more than once when he was a sleep-deprived, overworked resident. I took a deep breath, steadied my hand, and pressed the call button. When his familiar, warm voice answered, I tried to keep my own from shaking. "Javier," I said, "it's Margaret Holloway. I need your help. I think my son is trying to poison me." There was a long, static-filled silence on the other end of the line. For a moment, I thought he'd hung up. I could picture him in his office, the Denver skyline behind him, rubbing his forehead and wondering if his respected former mentor had finally lost her mind. The thought was a cold spike of fear in my gut. What if he didn't believe me? "Margaret?" Javier's voice was cautious, stripped of its earlier warmth. It was the voice of a doctor handling a delicate situation. "That's a very serious accusation." "I know how it sounds, Javier. Believe me, I've asked myself 100 times today if I'm being paranoid, if this is just old age making me fanciful." I took a shaky breath. But my gut, the same gut that told me when a patient was about to crash before the monitors did, is screaming at me. He gave me an unlabeled pill. He called it a special compound from a colleague. He wants me to take one every day. "Did you take it?" "I pretended to," I said, my voice low and conspiratorial. I palmed it. "I still have it, Javier. It's a large, white, uncoated tablet." The silence that followed was different. It was shorter, charged with professional curiosity. "Okay," he said, his tone shifting. He was no longer talking to a potentially confused old woman. He was talking to a colleague presenting a case. "Okay, Margaret, that's good. Do not under any circumstances take that pill. Can you get it to me, discreetly?" "I think so, but what will that tell us?" "It will tell us everything. I can have the lab at the hospital run a full analysis. We'll know exactly what's in it within 24 hours. He paused. "But that's only one part of the equation. The other part is you. I need to see you, Margaret. I want to run a full workup. Blood panels, a cognitive assessment, an MRI. We need a baseline. We need to rule out any actual underlying conditions that could be causing these symptoms. If we're going to fight this, We need to do it with irrefutable data. Hope, fragile but fierce, bloomed in my chest. Data, evidence. This was a language I understood. This was the opposite of the fog. When can you see me? My schedule is booked for weeks, but for you, I'll stay late tomorrow. Come to the main entrance of the Gerontology Center at 6 p.m. I'll meet you there myself. And Margaret, he added, his voice firm, tell no one, especially not your son. I won't. Thank you, Javier, truly. You looked out for me when I was starting out, he said softly. It's the least I can do. Stay safe, and keep pretending. We hung up, and I sank back into Arthur's chair, the leather sighing around me. The house no longer felt like a fortress under siege. It felt like a command center. I had a plan. I had an ally. The rage from before had cooled, solidifying into a hard, diamond-sharp resolve. The next day passed in a haze of feigned fragility. When Ethan and Victoria arrived in the early afternoon, I made sure I was sitting in my chair, a shawl draped over my shoulders, looking as frail as possible. How's our favorite patient today? Victoria chirped, placing a bag of organic kale on the counter with a thud. She hated that I didn't eat enough kale. A little tired, dear, I said, letting my voice waver. Ethan came over, his pharmacist's face a mask of professional care. He was driving a new car, a sleek black German sedan that was far too expensive for a community pharmacist. Victoria must have gotten a promotion, I thought wryly. Did you remember your special vitamin this morning? He asked, his eyes scanning my face for any sign of improvement or decline. Oh heavens, it slipped my mind completely, I lied, tapping my forehead. See, this is what I mean. My brain is like a sieve. No problem, Mom. That's why we're here, he said, his relief palpable. He produced another one of the chalky white pills. Better to take it in the afternoon than not at all. I performed the same maneuver as the day before, the pill vanishing into the folds of my cardigan as I drank the water. Ethan and Victoria exchanged another one of their looks, a silent, smug communication that made my blood boil. While Ethan was putting away the kale, Victoria wandered into the living room, her eyes appraising the art on the walls. She paused in front of a landscape Arthur had bought for me on our 25th anniversary. You know, Mom, that painting would look absolutely perfect over the fireplace in our new house, she said, her tone light and conversational. New house? I asked, keeping my voice mild. She flushed slightly. Oh, well, we're just looking. Dreaming, but one has to plan for the future. I knew exactly what future she was planning for, a future paid for with my assets. It's a lovely thought, dear, I said. After they left, I retrieved the second pill and placed it with the first. 2 of them now. My evidence was growing. I had a few hours until my appointment with Javier. I decided to spend it in the garden, my one true sanctuary. The late afternoon sun was warm on my back as I knelt to pull weeds from around my prize-winning roses. It was grounding, the feel of the soil, the scent of the damp earth. Those are looking magnificent this year, Margaret. A voice called from over the fence. It was Agnes, my neighbor for the past 30 years. She was a retired history teacher, a widow like me, with eyes that missed nothing and a tongue that reported most of it. They do seem to be happy, I called back, smiling. It was a genuine smile, the first one I felt all day. She came over to the fence, her shrewd eyes taking in my appearance. You're looking a bit peaked, dear. Everything all right? Just the usual aches and pains, I demurred. Agnes snorted. I saw that new monstrosity your son is driving. Looks like he robbed a bank. I chuckled. I think his wife is doing very well at her law firm. She said, her gaze sharpening. They're here a lot lately. Used to be you were lucky to see them once a month. Now they're practically living on your doorstep. Not to be a nosy Parker, but I hope they're not giving you any trouble. My heart warmed. Underneath her gossipy exterior, Agnes was fiercely protective. Ethan's just worried about my health, I said, sticking to my story. Well, there's worrying and then there's hovering, she sniffed. You know where I am if you ever need anything, and I mean anything. My nephew is a detective with the Denver PD, It was an offer, a lifeline I hadn't even known was there. Thank you, Agnes. That means more than you know. As I went inside to get ready for my appointment, a new sense of strength settled over me. I wasn't just a sick old woman. I was Margaret Holloway, a head nurse who had run the busiest emergency room in the city. I had a doctor on my side. I had a nosy neighbor with a nephew in the police force, and I had 2 identical white pills in my purse, ticking like tiny time bombs. The fog was lifting, and I was starting to see the battlefield very, very clearly. Use arrow up and arrow down to select a turn, enter to jump to it, and escape to return to the chat. The Gerontology Center was quiet at 6 o'clock. The bustling energy of the day faded to a low hum. The fluorescent lights of the lobby felt harsh, sterile, a stark contrast to the warm, lived-in comfort of my home. I clutched my purse, the 2 pills inside feeling like illicit contraband. I felt a pang of self-doubt. Was I being ridiculous? A hysterical old woman inventing conspiracies? Just as the thought took hold, a side door opened and Javier appeared. He looked older than I remembered, with threads of silver in his black hair and the tired, compassionate lines of a dedicated doctor etched around his eyes. He wore blue scrubs, and the sight of them was strangely comforting, a uniform of my old life. "Margaret," he said, his smile genuine as he took my arm. "I'm so glad you came. Let's go to my office where we can talk." He led me through a series of quiet hallways to an office that was both professional and personal. Medical journals were stacked neatly on one corner of the desk, but the walls were covered with framed photos of a smiling woman and 2 young boys. He saw me looking at them. "My wife, Sophia, and my sons, Mateo and Lucas," he said, his voice softening. "They're my why. They're beautiful, Javier." He motioned for me to sit in a comfortable chair opposite his desk and then closed the door. The casual action felt significant, creating a seal of confidentiality. "All right, Margaret. First things first, let's see what you've brought me." With a slightly trembling hand, I opened the film canister and tipped the 2 white pills onto a piece of paper he'd placed on the desk. He leaned forward, his expression intense, examining them under his desk lamp. He didn't touch them, but he studied their size, their texture, the way they were scored down the middle. "Unmarked, uncoded, scored for easy division," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "Could be anything from a high-dose aspirin to a black-market benzodiazepine." He carefully slid the pills into a small plastic specimen bag. "I'll take this to the lab myself tonight. I'll mark it as a priority tox screen. We should have results by tomorrow afternoon." He sealed the bag and placed it in his desk drawer, locking it. "Now, for part 2, let's talk about you. Tell me about this fog. When did it start? How does it feel? Be specific." For the next hour, I was a patient again. I described the memory lapses, the disorientation, the tremor, the new, unsettling clumsiness. I recounted my stumble on the stairs. I spoke of the overwhelming fatigue that would descend without warning. He listened intently, taking meticulous notes, his questions sharp and targeted. He wasn't just listening to my words, he was observing me, assessing my speech patterns, my recall, my focus. "Okay," he said finally, setting his pen down. "I've arranged for the lab and the imaging department to stay open for you. We're going to do this now. Full blood workup and then an MRI of your head. I want to see what's going on in there." The tests were a blur of needles and machinery. The MRI was the hardest part, the claustrophobic tube and the deafening, rhythmic banging of the magnets. I closed my eyes and focused on the image of my rose garden, the scent of the earth, the feeling of the sun on my skin. I thought of Arthur. He would have been so furious. He would have seen right through Ethan and Victoria from the start. Arthur never suffered fools, and he certainly wouldn't have tolerated vipers in his own home. When it was all over, Javier walked me back to his office. It was nearly 9 o'clock. "You're a trooper, Margaret," he said, pouring me a cup of water from a pitcher on his credenza. "I've seen worse," I said, though my hand was shaking so much I had to use 2 to hold the cup. "The preliminary blood work is already coming back to my tablet," he said, picking up a device from his desk. He scrolled through the screen, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Well, this is interesting." "What is it?" My heart hammered against my ribs. "Your kidney function is a little off. Not dangerously so, but elevated creatinine levels, and your electrolytes are slightly imbalanced. But what's really jumping out at me is your thyroid. Your TSH levels are through the roof." It's classic hypothyroidism. That alone could account for a lot of what you're experiencing. The fatigue, the cognitive fog, even the tremor. A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it made me dizzy. It was a real thing, a medical condition. I wasn't losing my mind. "So it's my thyroid?" "It could be, or it could be a contributing factor," he cautioned. "The MRI results won't be read by the radiologist until morning, but I've taken a look at the images. I don't see any obvious signs of a stroke, a tumor, or the kind of atrophy we associate with advanced Alzheimer's." He looked me straight in the eye. "Margaret, based on this initial data, I see no reason why you shouldn't be perfectly capable of managing your own affairs. With some medication for the thyroid, you should feel a marked improvement." Tears welled in my eyes. "Thank you, Javier." "Don't thank me yet," he said, his expression hardening. "We still don't know what's in those pills. If it is what I suspect it might be, it could be deliberately exacerbating your hypothyroid symptoms, making the fog worse, making you seem more confused and unsteady than you are." The pieces clicked into place. They weren't just waiting for me to decline, they were accelerating it. They were actively making me sick. I'll call you the moment I get the lab results tomorrow, he said, walking me to the door. In the meantime, you go home, act the part, take their damn pill and palm it. Smile sweetly. Be the frail old woman they want you to be. We are building a case, Margaret, and every pill you collect is another brick in the wall. Driving home through the dark, quiet streets of Denver, the city lights felt brighter, sharper. The world was coming back into focus. The rage I'd felt the day before had been a wild, chaotic fire. Now, it was a forge. It was shaping my fear and my grief into something hard and strong, something that could be wielded like a weapon. When I got home, there was a message on the answering machine. It was Victoria. Hi, Mom, her saccharine voice filled the kitchen. Just calling to check on you. Ethan and I were thinking we'd love to have our lawyer, a wonderful man named Mr. Davies, just stop by with us tomorrow for a casual chat. He's an expert in estate planning, and we thought it would be a good idea to get some of your affairs in order, just in case. It would give us all such peace of mind. We'll see you around 1. Sleep tight. The message ended with an audible click. A lawyer, estate planning. It was happening faster than I thought. They weren't just nudging me toward the edge, they were preparing to give me a firm, decisive shove. Peace of mind, she'd said. Theirs, not mine. I erased the message, my hand steady. Let them bring their lawyer. I would be ready. I was no longer a patient. I was a combatant. The next morning, I woke before the dawn, the habit of a lifetime nurse ingrained too deeply to break. But for the first time in months, I didn't feel a leaden fatigue weighing me down. I felt a nervous, thrumming energy, the kind of focused alertness that comes before a major operation. Today was the day of the lawyer. Today, I would meet the man they had hired to dismantle my life. I spent the morning creating my stage. I put on an old, faded housecoat, one Arthur had always disliked. I skipped brushing my hair, letting it look wild and unkempt. I dabbed a little water under my eyes to make them look puffy. I practiced letting my hand tremble as I poured my tea. By the time 1 o'clock approached, I was the very picture of a confused, vulnerable senior citizen, the kind of woman a predatory lawyer would view as an easy mark. At precisely 1:15, late enough to show their casual disregard, Ethan's sleek German car crunched up the gravel driveway. I watched from the window as they got out, flanking a man in a pinstripe suit who carried a gleaming leather briefcase. He had the kind of polished, predatory smile I'd seen on pharmaceutical reps trying to push a new, overpriced drug. This was Mr. Davies. I opened the door before they could knock, pretending to be startled by their presence. Oh, Ethan, Victoria, I wasn't expecting you. We called yesterday, Mom, remember? Ethan said, his voice laced with exaggerated patience as he guided Mr. Davies inside. This is Mr. Davies, the gentleman I told you about. He's here to help us. Help with what? I asked, looking from face to face with what I hoped was a convincing expression of bewilderment. To simplify things, Mrs. Holloway, Mr. Davies said, his voice smooth as oil. He took my hand, his grip a little too firm, his eyes doing a swift, cold inventory of my living room. Your children are concerned, and they want to ensure you're taken care of, that your wishes are respected, and that your estate is protected. My estate? He means the house, Mom, Victoria chimed in, already directing Mr. Davies to the most comfortable chair. And Arthur's investments. It's all very complicated. We want to take that burden off your shoulders. They settled around the coffee table, a united front of concern. Ethan took out the now familiar white bottle. Time for your vitamin, Mom. I performed my now practiced routine, palming the pill while they watched, my third piece of evidence. I placed it in my pocket as Mr. Davies opened his briefcase with a series of decisive clicks. Now, Margaret, he began, dropping the Mrs. Holloway in a disarming attempt at intimacy. I've reviewed the documents Ethan and Victoria were able to provide. It seems Arthur's will appointed you as the sole executor and beneficiary of his estate. That's a significant responsibility. He slid a thick sheaf of papers across the table towards me. What we've prepared here is a simple transfer of power of attorney. It would designate Ethan as the primary decision-maker for your financial and medical affairs. It's a standard procedure designed to protect you. Protect me from what? I asked, my voice a frail whisper. From confusion, Davies said, choosing his word carefully. From predatory scams. From the difficulty of managing complex finances when one isn't feeling 100%. He smiled again, a flash of white teeth. It simply allows Ethan to pay your bills, manage the portfolio, and make healthcare decisions in your best interest if and when you're unable to do so yourself. And what about the house? I looked at Victoria. She jumped in, her voice earnest. We've found the most wonderful managed care community for you, Mom. It's called Sunset Vistas. It has nurses on staff, organized activities, you wouldn't have to worry about a thing. Selling this big, old house would more than cover the cost and leave a tidy sum left over for your future needs. A tidy sum for them, she meant. My phone, which I had placed on the end table beside me, buzzed. I glanced at it. The screen showed a text from a number I didn't recognize. My heart leaped. It had to be Javier. "Oh, dear," I said, fumbling for the phone. "It's one of those text messages. I can never read them." I held the phone out towards Ethan. "Could you read this for me, dear? My eyes are so blurry today." Ethan took the phone, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face at the interruption. He glanced at the screen. His expression froze. The color drained from his face, leaving a pasty, sick-looking pallor. "What is it, Ethan?" Victoria asked, impatient. Ethan's eyes were locked on the phone screen. He swallowed hard. "It says, lab results are in. The pills contain a high concentration of haloperidol, a powerful antipsychotic. Side effects include tremors, confusion, and severe cognitive impairment, especially dangerous for patients with hypothyroidism. Report filed. JR?" A profound, deathly silence descended upon the room. The air grew thick, heavy, and unbreathable. Victoria snatched the phone from Ethan's hand, her perfectly made-up face contorting into a mask of disbelief, then horror. Mr. Davies, the lawyer, looked from the phone to their faces, his oily smile vanishing, replaced by the sharp, assessing look of a man realizing he has just stepped into a legal minefield. I let the silence stretch, letting the weight of the words sink in. Haloperidol, an antipsychotic, a chemical kosh. They had been systematically poisoning me, turning my own body against me, manufacturing the very symptoms they were now using as a pretext to steal my life. Finally, I spoke. My voice was no longer frail or confused. It was cold, clear, and resonant with a fury that had been simmering for weeks. "JR," I said, looking directly at my son, "is Dr. Javier Ramirez, head of gerontology at Denver General. I saw him yesterday. I had a full medical workup. He has my blood tests, my MRI scans, and 3 of your little white vitamins for his report." Ethan stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He was speechless. Victoria found her voice first, a shrill, panicked sound. "This is a misunderstanding. Ethan would never, it's a mistake, some kind of terrible mistake." "The only mistake," I said, rising slowly from my chair, my posture straight, my gaze unwavering, "was your assumption that I was a fool." I turned my attention to the lawyer. "Mr. Davies, I believe your business here is concluded, unless you wish to be named as an accomplice in a criminal conspiracy to defraud and endanger a senior citizen. Your client was attempting to have me sign over power of attorney based on symptoms he himself was inducing with a controlled substance. I'm sure the State Bar Association would find that fascinating." Davies paled. He began shoving his papers back into his briefcase with frantic, clumsy movements. "I was not aware. I was retained under false pretenses. My involvement ends now." He practically scrambled out of his chair and fled towards the door, not even bothering to say goodbye. Now it was just me and them. My son and his wife, the 2 people who were supposed to love and protect me. They looked at me, trapped and exposed, their masks of concern ripped away to reveal the raw, ugly greed beneath. "Mom, please," Ethan stammered, his eyes wide with fear. I can explain." "Can you?" I asked, my voice dripping with ice. "Can you explain why you would do this? For this house? For money? Was it worth destroying your mother's health, her mind? Was it worth destroying my love for you?" The question hung in the air, a final, devastating blow. The siege was over, the enemy was routed. But as I looked at my son's terrified, crumbling face, I felt no victory, only a vast, hollow ache of a loss so profound it stole my breath. Victoria, however, was not one to crumble. Panic quickly morphed into venomous defiance. Her fear, cornered and raw, lashed out. "Don't you dare try to take the moral high ground, Margaret," she spat, her voice sharp and brittle. She stood up, her posture rigid, a stark contrast to my son's broken demeanor. "You have no idea what it's like, sitting on all this wealth while we're struggling." "Struggling?" I repeated the word, my voice dangerously soft. "Is that a new $1,600 handbag, Victoria? And Ethan, is that a $60,000 car in my driveway? Your definition of struggling seems rather flexible. We have student loans, a mortgage. We're trying to build a life, a future for our children," she shot back. "You don't have children," I stated, the simple fact cutting through her theatrical defense. "We want to," she shrieked. "But everything is so expensive. IVF, adoption, it all costs a fortune you're just hoarding. This house is a museum, you don't need it. You rattle around in here all alone, clinging to the past while we're trying to build our future." It was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. In her twisted worldview, my life, my security, my home, were not mine by right. They were resources she was entitled to, a stockpile she should be allowed to raid for her own ambitions. My role was not to live, but to provide. "So you decided to drug me," I said, the words falling like chips of ice. "You decided to destroy my mind, have me locked away in some facility, and sell my home so you could fund your designer lifestyle and maybe have a baby. That was your grand plan." "It wasn't like that," Ethan finally mumbled, his gaze fixed on the floor. He couldn't look at me. "Victoria said it would be a kindness, that you were already slipping, that this would just ease the transition, make it less stressful for you." "A kindness," I whispered, the word tasting like poison. I looked at my son, the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose fevers I had nursed, whose heartbreaks I had mended. He had been convinced to poison his own mother as an act of mercy. "She is the architect of this, Ethan, but you are the contractor. You're a pharmacist. You knew what haloperidol was, you knew the dosage, you knew the risks. You brought the poison into my home and you watched me take it day after day. She may be the brain, but you, Ethan, you are the hands." He flinched as if I had physically struck him. He sank onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, wretched sobs. Victoria glared at him with contempt. "Oh, for God's sake, Ethan, stop blubbering, it's pathetic." She turned her fury back to me. "So what now, Margaret? You're going to call the police? Send your only son to prison? Is that what your victory looks like? You all alone in your precious museum while Ethan rots in a cell?" It was a shrewd, cruel question, and it hit its mark. The thought of Ethan, my Ethan, in a prison uniform was a physical pain, a twisting in my gut. She knew it. She was counting on my maternal instinct, the one thing she and Ethan had so brutally exploited to be my ultimate weakness. Before I could answer, my phone rang. The sound was jarring in the tense silence. I looked at the caller ID. It was Agnes, my neighbor. I almost ignored it, but a sudden instinct made me answer. I put it on speakerphone. "Margaret, dear, I'm so sorry to bother you." Agnes's brisk voice filled the room. "But I wanted to let you know my nephew, Detective Miller. He's just popped by for a visit, and I happened to mention your little chat yesterday. He said, and I quote, 'Attempting to drug a senior citizen to gain control of their assets is a Class 3 felony in Colorado. He's here having a slice of my lemon meringue pie if you need to have a word with him about anything at all. No trouble. Just thought you should know.'" The effect was instantaneous. Victoria's face went completely white, her bravado evaporating like mist. Ethan's head shot up, his eyes wide with a fresh wave of terror. The abstract threat of prison had suddenly become very real, a man eating pie right next door. I looked at them, my two tormentors, now reduced to pale, trembling statues of fear. I held their future in the palm of my hand. A word from me, a short walk next door, and their lives as they knew them would be over. "Thank you for the information, Agnes," I said, my voice calm and steady. "That's very helpful. I'll keep that in mind. I have to go now. I have some family matters to attend to." I hung up the phone and placed it deliberately on the coffee table. The silence returned, but now it was different. It was the silence of a courtroom awaiting a verdict. "She's bluffing," Victoria whispered, though she sounded anything but certain. "Is she?" I asked softly. I walked over to the bay window and looked out at my garden. The roses were in full bloom, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the ugliness inside the house. I could see the roof of Agnes's home through the trees. I thought about the detective, about justice, about what they deserved. And then I thought about what I deserved. Did I want a life consumed by legal battles, court dates, and the lingering poison of a public scandal? Did I want my final years to be defined by their crime? Or did I want peace? I turned back to face them. "Get out," I said. They stared at me, confused. "What?" Ethan stammered. "Get out of my house. Now." My voice was quiet, but it held the unyielding strength of forged steel. "There will be no police. There will be no charges. I will not allow your ugliness to become the final chapter of my life." A flicker of hope, of relief, crossed Victoria's face. She thought she had won. She thought I was letting them off. "But understand this," I continued, my eyes locking onto hers, then onto my son's. "You are dead to me. From this moment on, I have no son. I have no daughter-in-law. Any inheritance you thought you were entitled to is gone. My will is being rewritten tomorrow. You will never receive another penny from me. You will never again be welcome in this house. If I see you on my property, I will call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. We are finished." Victoria opened her mouth to argue, to protest, but one look at my face and the words died in her throat. She saw no weakness, no sentimentality. She saw only the finality of a door that had been slammed, locked, and bolted shut forever. She grabbed her expensive handbag and pulled Ethan, who seemed to be in a state of shock, to his feet. "Fine," she hissed. "Have your house, have your lonely, miserable life. See who comes to help you when you really do fall down the stairs." They walked to the door. Ethan paused on the threshold and looked back at me, his face a mess of tears and shame. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Goodbye, Ethan," I said, and I turned my back on him, facing the window and my garden once more. I heard the front door close with a soft click. A few moments later, the sound of the German sedan's engine roared to life, followed by the squeal of tires on gravel as they sped away. And then there was silence. A profound, absolute quiet. I stood there for a long time, looking out at my roses, breathing in the stillness. I had not chosen justice. I had not chosen revenge. I had chosen freedom. Freedom from them. Freedom for me. The house was no longer a museum of the past or an asset for their future. It was simply my home again. And in the deafening quiet, I began to hear the sound of my own life, waiting to be lived. The days that followed were an exercise in reclaiming my own space, a slow, deliberate exorcism of the psychic residue left by my children. The house, which had felt like a stage for their deception, a set where I was the unwitting lead in a tragedy they were directing, slowly began to feel like a sanctuary again. The first thing I did was walk through every room and open the windows wide, even though the morning air still held a mountain chill. I wanted the breeze to sweep through the halls, to chase out the lingering, cloying scent of Victoria's expensive perfume and the stale, suffocating energy of their greed. I wanted the house to breathe again. I spent an entire afternoon rearranging the furniture. It wasn't about aesthetics, it was about power. I moved Arthur's beloved leather armchair from its passive, observational post by the bay window to a more central, commanding position in the living room, directly opposite the fireplace. From here, I could see the front door, the entrance to the kitchen, and the foot of the stairs. It was no longer a chair for quiet reflection. It was a throne from which I could survey my domain. It was a small, symbolic act, but it felt monumental. I was no longer waiting and watching for the next intrusion. I was presiding over my own life. I cleaned out the refrigerator, tossing the organic kale, the wheatgrass juice, and the other healthy items Victoria had brought, replacing them with a small, perfect steak and a bottle of the good Cabernet Arthur, and I used to save for special occasions. This, I decided, was a special occasion. My first official act of freedom was a call to my lawyer, Clara Mendez, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had handled Arthur's estate with formidable efficiency. I didn't give her the sordid details of the poisoning. The words felt too ugly to speak into the phone. I simply stated that there had been a profound and irreparable breach of trust. "Clara, I need to revise my will immediately," I said, my voice clear and without a trace of the tremor that had plagued it for weeks. "I want to completely disinherit my son, Ethan Holloway." There was a brief, professional silence on the line. "Completely? Margaret, that's a significant step. In my experience, even in cases of extreme estrangement, most parents leave a token amount to prevent the will from being contested on grounds of omission." "There will be no token amount," I said firmly. "I want it explicitly stated that the omission is intentional. I want everything, the house, the portfolio, all of it to be placed in a charitable trust upon my death." "I see," Clara said, and I could hear the faint sound of her typing. "And this trust, does it have a name? A purpose?" A sense of clarity, of pure, righteous purpose washed over me. "Yes, it will be named the Arthur Holloway Foundation for Ethical Medicine. Its purpose will be to provide scholarships for nursing students who demonstrate exceptional compassion and to fund research grants for the study and prevention of elder abuse." The irony was bitter, but the intent was restorative. It was a way to turn their poison into an antidote for others. It was a legacy Arthur would have been proud of. "That's quite a statement, Margaret," Clara said, and for the first time, I heard a note of profound respect, even admiration, in her voice. "I'll have the preliminary documents drawn up and sent by courier by the end of the week. We'll make it ironclad." My next call was to Javier. "The birds have flown the coop," I told him, the phrase sounding ridiculously cinematic in my quiet kitchen. "Are you all right, Margaret? Did they give you any trouble?" His concern was immediate and genuine. "Nothing I couldn't handle. I'm better than all right, Javier. I'm free." I explained my decision not to press charges, sensing he might question it. He was quiet for a moment. "As a doctor, I want to see them held accountable to the fullest extent," he said honestly. "But as your friend, I respect your decision to choose peace. Sometimes the most healing thing we can do is remove the cancer, not spend the rest of our lives analyzing it. Just know the report has been filed with the hospital's ethics committee and the state licensing board. It's a permanent record. If Ethan ever applies for a new position or a promotion, it will be there. It's a form of quiet justice. He then switched to his professional tone. Now, about your health. I've sent a prescription for levothyroxine to your local pharmacy. This is the real vitamin you need. It will manage the hypothyroidism. You should start feeling a significant improvement in your energy levels and mental clarity within a few weeks, but I want to see you back here in a month for a follow-up. Doctor's orders. That afternoon, I walked to the pharmacy. The simple act of walking a few blocks on my own, without the fog or the unsteadiness, felt like a miracle. As I was waiting for the pharmacist to fill my prescription, I saw a familiar figure at the greeting card aisle. It was Linda Petrov, a firecracker of a nurse who had worked the night shift in my for 15 years. "Margaret Holloway, is that really you?" she exclaimed, her face breaking into a wide, warm smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. We embraced a slightly awkward but heartfelt reunion right next to the get well soon cards. "Linda, my goodness, you haven't aged a day," I said, and I meant it. "Liar," she laughed. "I was so sorry to hear about Arthur. He was one of the good ones. How have you been holding up?" "It's been an adjustment," I said, the understatement of the century. "I bet." "Listen, a few of us from the old guard at Denver General, me, Sarah, Tom from radiology, we get together for lunch on the first Tuesday of every month. It's mostly just us complaining about the new computer systems and telling stories about how you once stared down a biker with a stab wound until he apologized for swearing at a junior nurse. You're a legend, Margaret. You should join us. It would do our old hearts good to see you." An invitation. A simple, uncomplicated invitation to be among people who knew me not as a frail mother or a collection of assets, but as their former boss, their colleague, their friend. It felt like a lifeline being tossed into my quiet, still waters. "I would love that, Linda. I really would." We exchanged numbers, and as I walked home with the small, legitimate prescription bottle in my bag, I felt a lightness in my step I hadn't realized was missing. For years, my world had been shrinking, contracting around the small, suffocating orbit of Ethan and Victoria's needs. Now, it was beginning to expand again. But the silence from my son was a living thing. Every time the phone rang, my stomach would clench. Every car that slowed on my street made me glance nervously towards the window. I had banished them, but their ghosts remained, haunting the edges of my newfound peace. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me, that people like Victoria didn't accept defeat. They merely regrouped and planned a new line of attack. My confirmation arrived a week later. It wasn't a phone call or an unannounced visit. It was a crisp, formal envelope delivered by a courier who required my signature. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize, a name in embossed lettering that looked expensive and aggressive. My hands trembled slightly as I slid open the seal. The language was cold, formal, and brutal. It was a petition to the court. Victoria and Ethan were suing for an emergency guardianship over me and my estate. They were seeking to have me declared mentally incompetent and a danger to myself. Their primary evidence, the document stated, was my sudden and irrational decision to completely disinherit her only, loving son, which they claimed was clear evidence of a precipitous decline in executive function. They cited my increasing social isolation and erratic behavior as reported by concerned family members who have been forcibly prevented from providing care. They were twisting my act of self-preservation into proof of insanity. The final pages contained a sworn affidavit from a man named Dr. Alastair Finch. He claimed to have remotely assessed Mrs. Holloway's case file as provided by her family and concluded that my actions were highly consistent with the onset of paranoid personality disorder, frequently comorbid with age-related cognitive decline. Dr. Alastair Finch. I knew that name. My mind, now clear and sharp, reached back through years of hospital politics and medical gossip. He was a notorious expert for hire, a doctor who had lost his surgical privileges years ago and now made a handsome living providing whatever diagnosis a lawyer paid him to provide. He was a medical jackal. I sank into Arthur's chair, the legal papers shaking in my hand. The initial euphoria of my freedom vanished, replaced by a cold, hard dread. I had avoided a criminal battle only to be plunged into a civil one. This was their new weapon. They couldn't poison my body with haloperidol anymore, so they were going to poison my name, my reputation, my very sanity in a court of law. The war was not over. It had just moved to a new, more treacherous battlefield. Use arrow up and arrow down to select a turn, enter to jump to it, and escape to return to the chat. For a full day, I let the dread wash over me. I sat in Arthur's chair, the legal petition lying on the coffee table like a coiled snake, and I allowed myself to feel the cold tendrils of fear. They were formidable enemies. They had my son's intimate knowledge of my life, Victoria's ruthless legal cunning, and a hired-gun doctor willing to perjure himself. I was a 68-year-old woman, alone. The fight seemed impossibly skewed. The thought of sitting in a courtroom, having my life, my choices, my very mind, picked apart and pathologized by strangers was nauseating. It was exactly what they wanted. They wanted me to be too scared, too tired, too overwhelmed to fight back. They wanted me to give up. On the second day, I woke up angry. The fear had burned away, leaving behind the hard, familiar core of resolve that had defined my nursing career. I had faced down life-and-death situations, arrogant surgeons, and grieving, hysterical families. I would not be broken by a bundle of lies and a slick lawyer. My first call was to Clara Mendez. I can still hear the sharp intake of her breath as I read the petition to her over the phone. Guardianship, based on disinheritance? That's an incredibly aggressive move, Margaret, she said, her voice tight with professional outrage. It's a legal Hail Mary, and using Alastair Finch. That tells me they're playing dirty. He's scum, but he's persuasive scum. We need to move quickly and decisively. What's our first move? I asked, my pen poised over a notepad. I was back in command mode. Our first move is a counterassessment. We need our own expert, someone with impeccable credentials who can evaluate you and refute Finch's garbage affidavit. And we need someone better than just good. We need a titan. She was quiet for a moment, and I could hear her keyboard clicking furiously. I know who to call. Dr. Lena Petrova. She's the head of neuropsychiatry at the University of Colorado. She's a nationally recognized expert on cognitive aging. She testified before Congress. If Lena Petrova says you're sane, no judge in this state will dare to question it. The problem is, she's notoriously selective about the cases she takes. Will she take mine? She will if I have to camp on her doorstep, Clara said with grim determination. I'll send her the petition and a note of my own. In the meantime, I'm filing our official response. A flat denial of all claims and a motion to dismiss. I also want you to start a journal, Margaret. Document everything. Your daily activities, your conversations, your feelings. If this goes to a hearing, we want a record of a vibrant, engaged mind, not the isolated, confused woman they're painting you as. Every detail matters. My second call was harder. It was to Agnes. I needed a witness, someone who could testify to my state of mind, but I hated drawing her into my family's toxic mess. I walked over to her house, the legal papers in a manila envelope. She welcomed me into her cozy, sun-filled kitchen, which smelled of cinnamon and old books. As I laid out the situation, her shrewd eyes grew wider and her lips thinner with every word. When I finished, she slammed her hand down on the kitchen table, making the teacups rattle. That viper, she hissed, and I knew she meant Victoria. That ungrateful whelp. To do this to you, Margaret? After everything? Of course I'll be a witness. I'll tell them about our talks over the fence, about your garden, about the day you helped me reset my Wi-Fi router when I was about to throw the whole damn thing out the window. Does that sound like a woman who's lost her marbles? Her fierce loyalty was a balm to my frayed nerves. They'll twist it, Agnes. They'll say you're just another lonely old woman, that you're not a reliable observer. Agnes's eyes glinted. Let them try. I taught American history for 40 years. I know how to handle bullies and liars. Besides, she added, leaning forward conspiratorially, I might have a little something for them. She got up and went to a drawer, pulling out a small, spiral-bound notebook. I keep a neighborhood journal. Always have. Just little observations. Who's getting a new roof? Whose dog is digging up my petunias? She flipped through the pages. Ah, here we are. A log of every single time Ethan and Victoria's car was in your driveway for the last 6 months. The dates, the times, how long they stayed. Funny how their concerned visits only started getting long and frequent right around the time you started feeling so fuzzy, isn't it? I stared at her, dumbfounded. It was a timeline. A meticulous, dated record of their escalating presence in my life, which would perfectly correlate with the timeline of my manufactured illness. It was a beautiful, stunning piece of evidence. Agnes, I said, my voice thick with emotion, you may have just saved me. Nonsense, she sniffed, though her cheeks were pink with pleasure. It's what neighbors do. Now more tea, we have a war to plan. That afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number. My stomach lurched, but I answered, my voice a cool, steady hello. Am I speaking with Margaret Holloway? The voice was a woman's, deep and with a faint, unplaceable European accent. You are. This is Dr. Lena Petrova. My colleague Clara Mendez sent me your file. It is compelling. She paused. I rarely involve myself in guardianship cases. They are often messy and rooted in tragedy. But this case is rooted in something else. It is rooted in malice. And that I find I cannot abide. My breath caught in my throat. I am in my office now, Mrs. Holloway. I have a cancellation at 3 p.m. Can you be here? An hour later, I was sitting in a quiet, book-lined office, facing a woman with piercing blue eyes, a severe black bob, and an aura of intellectual brilliance that was almost palpable. Dr. Petrova put me through a grueling 3-hour cognitive assessment. It was a marathon of memory tests, logic puzzles, psychological questions, and abstract reasoning problems. It was exhausting, but I felt my old mind, the nurse's mind, the problem-solver's mind, rising to the challenge. I would not fail. At the end of it, she leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. Well, she said, her accent making the words sound crisp and definitive. Your short-term recall is slightly impaired, which is perfectly consistent with a recent, severe, and untreated hypothyroid condition. Your long-term memory, however, is exceptional. Your executive function, your logic, and your reasoning skills are not just intact, they are in the top percentile for your age group. She looked at me, and for the first time, a small, wry smile touched her lips. Margaret, you are no more incompetent than I am. In fact, I would wager you are significantly saner than the 2 people who are suing you. She stood up and walked to her window, which overlooked the university campus. I will write my report. It will be thorough, it will be unequivocal, and it will be, I assure you, a professional annihilation of Dr. Alastair Finch. We will win this. I walked out of that office and into the late afternoon sun, feeling as though I had been armed and armored by the finest general in the land. I had my lawyer, I had my witness, and now I had my champion. The dread was gone, replaced by a cold, thrilling certainty. Let them come. I was ready for the fight of my life. The weeks leading up to the preliminary hearing were a whirlwind of strategy sessions and depositions. Clara was a force of nature, orchestrating our defense with the precision of a field marshal. We met in her downtown office, a sleek, glass-walled space that felt like a war room. The coffee was strong, and the resolve was stronger. They've requested to depose you, Margaret, Clara announced during one meeting, sliding a document across the polished conference table. And they want to depose Agnes and Dr. Petrova. They want to intimidate us, I said, my voice steady. Exactly, Clara agreed. Victoria is leading this charge, I can feel it. She's a litigator. She thinks she can break you down on the stand, make you look confused, get you to contradict yourself. She'll try to paint Agnes as a doddering old gossip and attack Dr. Petrova's methods. This is her arena. She's underestimating us, I said. Profoundly, Clara said with a grim smile. I've arranged for a mock deposition. I'm bringing in a colleague, a real shark named Marcus Thorne. His job will be to play the part of their lawyer and tear you apart. It will be brutal, but it will prepare you for their dirtiest tricks. The mock deposition was as grueling as she'd promised. Marcus Thorne was a master of insinuation and condescension. He twisted my words, questioned my memory, and brought up Arthur's death in a blatant attempt to make me emotional. Mrs. Holloway, isn't it true that since your husband's passing, you've become more reclusive? He'd asked, his voice dripping with false sympathy. I was grieving, I answered, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. Or were you becoming confused, forgetting to return calls, neglecting your home? Isn't that why your son and his loving wife felt the need to step in and provide care? My son stepped in to poison me, I replied, my voice dangerously quiet. Objection, Clara snapped, playing her role. Speculation, sustained, Marcus said with a nod. Strike that. Mrs. Holloway, let's talk about your finances. You have a complex portfolio, correct? Do you understand what a derivative is? Can you explain the amortization schedule on your mortgage? He was trying to drown me in jargon, to make me seem ignorant and incapable. But Arthur and I had managed our own finances for 50 years. I took a deep breath. A derivative is a financial contract whose value is derived from an underlying asset. And I don't have a mortgage, Mr. Thorne. My house has been paid off for 22 years. Marcus Thorne allowed a small, genuine smile to crack his predatory facade. By the end of the session, I was exhausted but exhilarated. I had held my own. Agnes's deposition was a masterpiece of cantankerous, unshakable testimony. Victoria's lawyer, a slick young man who clearly underestimated her, tried to paint her as an unreliable busybody. "So, Mrs. Miller, you spend a great deal of your time observing your neighbors?" he asked patronizingly. "I spend my time in my garden, young man," Agnes retorted, peering at him over her spectacles. "If your client and his wife chose to conduct their business in plain sight of my prize-winning hydrangeas, that's their affair. I simply wrote down what I saw." As a history teacher, I have a deep appreciation for primary sources. She then produced her neighborhood journal, and with Clara's guidance, read her dated, timed entries into the record, creating an unshakable timeline of their escalating campaign of concern. The lawyer's face grew tighter with every entry. But the true masterstroke was Dr. Petrova. She arrived at her deposition looking like a European film star, impeccably dressed, her aura of authority filling the room before she even spoke. She systematically and dispassionately dismantled Dr. Finch's report. "Dr. Finch's remote assessment is a work of professional fiction," she stated, her voice calm and devastating. "It fails to include a single direct patient examination, any diagnostic imaging, or any blood analysis. It is, by any clinical standard, malpractice." My own comprehensive in-person evaluation, which included a full neuropsychiatric workup and a review of Mrs. Holloway's complete medical file, reveals a woman of superior intelligence whose recent, temporary cognitive symptoms are fully and medically attributable to an acute hypothyroid condition. A condition, I might add, whose symptoms are dangerously exacerbated by the off-label administration of haloperidol. She let that last phrase hang in the air. She hadn't accused them of poisoning me. She had simply stated a medical fact, a fact far more damning than any accusation. She concluded by stating, "To suggest that Mrs. Holloway is incompetent is not only medically indefensible, it is ludicrous." The day of the hearing arrived, a crisp, cold morning in early winter. I dressed carefully, not in a frail old woman's housecoat, but in a smart, tailored navy blue suit that I had worn to hospital board meetings. My hair was perfectly coiffed. My hand, thanks to the thyroid medication, was rock steady. The courtroom was smaller and more mundane than I had imagined. Ethan and Victoria sat at the opposing table, looking pale and tense. Ethan wouldn't meet my eye. Victoria, however, stared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. I met her gaze and held it, my expression calm and unreadable. The battle of wills had already begun. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Judge Eleanor Vance, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a reputation for being thorough and fair. She reviewed the piles of documents before her, her expression grim. Their lawyer began, painting a picture of a loving son and daughter-in-law, forced to take this drastic step out of overwhelming concern for a mother who was tragically losing herself. He called Ethan to the stand. My son, my own child, sat in the witness box and lied under oath. He spoke of my forgetfulness, my bouts of paranoia, my inability to manage daily tasks. With every lie, a small piece of my heart, a piece I didn't even know was still alive, withered and died. Clara's cross-examination was swift and brutal. "Mr. Holloway, you are a licensed pharmacist, correct?" "Yes." "Are you familiar with the drug haloperidol?" Ethan paled. "Yes." "And are you aware of its potential side effects, particularly in elderly patients with thyroid conditions?" "Objection," Victoria's lawyer shouted. "Relevance?" "It is deeply relevant, Your Honor," Clara said calmly, "as it speaks to the nature of Mr. Holloway's concern for his mother's health." "I'll allow it," Judge Vance said, her eyes fixed on Ethan. "Answer the question, Mr. Holloway." Ethan stammered, contradicted himself, and wilted under the pressure, his lies unraveling thread by thread. Then they called their expert, Dr. Finch. He was as smarmy in person as I had imagined. He confidently spouted his prepaid diagnosis. Clara's cross-examination was a thing of beauty. She didn't just question his findings, she eviscerated his credentials, bringing up 3 prior cases where his testimony had been discredited and he had been formally censured by the medical board. Dr. Finch left the stand looking 10 years older and 100 times less confident. Finally, it was our turn. Clara called Dr. Petrova, who presented her findings with unshakable authority. She called Agnes, who presented her journal with the pride of a historian revealing a long-lost manuscript. And then Clara called me. As I walked to the witness stand, I felt a strange sense of calm. I was not a victim. I was a survivor. I was a head nurse. I was Margaret Holloway. I sat down, looked directly at Judge Vance, and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And then I began to speak. I told them everything. My voice, amplified slightly by the courtroom microphone, was the steadiest it had been in months. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I simply laid out the facts, presenting the narrative of the past few months with the same methodical clarity I would have used to chart a patient's decline. I started with the fog. I described the subtle, creeping confusion, the unnerving moments of memory loss, the tremor in my hand. I spoke of my own fears that I was, perhaps, beginning to fade. Then I described Ethan and Victoria's escalating concern, their constant presence, the suffocating weight of their care. When Clara asked me about the special vitamins, I looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor, my son is a pharmacist. He brought me unlabeled pills in a white bottle and told me they were a proprietary blend of vitamins. As a nurse, every instinct I had told me this was wrong, a violation of every professional and ethical standard I knew." I described how I had pretended to take the pills, palming them day after day. I saw a flicker of something, surprise, perhaps respect, in Judge Vance's eyes. This was not the story of a passive, confused victim. This was the story of a woman who had fought back from the very beginning. Clara guided me through my visit to Dr. Ramirez, the tests, the diagnosis of hypothyroidism, and finally, the shocking lab results. When I learned the pills contained haloperidol, an antipsychotic drug, I understood, I said, my gaze sweeping over to my son. He flinched, physically recoiling from my words. I understood that my symptoms were not just happening to me, they were being done to me. The fog was not an ailment, it was an assault. Victoria's lawyer rose for the cross-examination, his face a mask of forced confidence. He intended to tear me down, to portray me as a vindictive, paranoid old woman lashing out at her loving family. "Mrs. Holloway," he began, his tone oozing with condescension, "isn't this entire, elaborate story of yours just a fabrication? A way to punish your son for being concerned? Isn't it true you were angry that he suggested you might need a more supportive living environment?" I was not angry at his concern, I corrected him calmly. I was terrified of his methods. "Are you suggesting that poisoning one's parent is an acceptable form of showing love?" He ignored the question. "You claim you only pretended to take these pills. Do you have any proof of that? Anyone who saw you palm these supposed pills?" "No," I admitted. "It was an act of self-preservation I performed in private." "So it's just your word against your son's?" he pressed, sensing an opening. "It is my word, backed by the sworn testimony of a nationally renowned neuropsychiatrist, the medical records from Denver General Hospital, a detailed timeline from a credible witness, and the physical evidence of the pills themselves, which were analyzed by a hospital laboratory," I replied, letting each piece of our meticulously constructed case land with quiet weight. The lawyer faltered, his line of attack crumbling. He pivoted, trying a different, more personal approach. "Let's talk about your decision to disinherit your son. A son you claim to have loved, to cut him off completely and totally. Wouldn't you agree that such an extreme, absolute action could be seen as irrational, unstable, even?" I paused, gathering my thoughts. This was the crux of their case, that my response was proof of my instability. I looked at the judge, then at my son, and finally at Victoria, who was watching me with a smug, reptilian stillness. "Your Honor," I said, my voice clear and carrying through the silent courtroom. "For over 40 years, my life was defined by the act of caring for others, as a nurse, as a wife, and most of all, as a mother. My love for my son was the most powerful, unconditional force in my life. I would have done anything for him. And that, I've come to realize, was the problem. My children came to see my love not as a gift to be cherished, but as a resource to be exploited. They saw my home not as a place of memories, but as an asset to be liquidated. They saw me not as their mother, but as an obstacle." I took a deep breath. The decision to disinherit my son was not irrational. It was the sanest, most rational decision I have ever made. It was not an act of punishment, it was an act of survival. It was the moment I chose to stop being a resource and started being a person again. It was the moment I decided my life, my health, and my peace of mind were worth more than their greed. If that is unstable, I concluded, my eyes locking with the judge's, then I can only hope to remain this unstable for the rest of my days. A profound hush fell over the courtroom. I had not only defended my sanity, I had redefined it. Judge Vance held my gaze for a long moment, her expression unreadable but intense. The lawyer, seeing his case utterly demolished, simply said, "No further questions, Your Honor." Clara stood. "The defense rests, Your Honor." Judge Vance looked from me to Ethan and Victoria. She removed her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose, a weary gesture that seemed to encompass the entire sordid affair. "I have reviewed the petitions, the affidavits, and the evidence presented," she began, her voice ringing with judicial authority. "I have listened to the testimony of all parties." She put her glasses back on and looked directly at Ethan and Victoria. "The petition for guardianship is not only denied, it is dismissed with extreme prejudice. This court finds the claims within it to be baseless, malicious, and frankly, abhorrent." Victoria let out a small gasp. "Furthermore," the judge continued, her voice hardening, "I am referring this entire case file to the district attorney's office for a full criminal investigation into potential charges of elder abuse, fraud, and the illegal administration of a controlled substance." This time, the gasp came from Ethan. The color drained from his face, and he looked as though he might faint. Victoria shot to her feet. "Your Honor, you can't. This is a family matter." "Ma'am, you are dangerously close to being held in contempt of court," Judge Vance warned, her voice like cracking ice. "What you have done is not a family matter. It is a crime. You preyed upon the person you should have been protecting. You exploited her love and weaponized her health against her. It is one of the most egregious abuses of familial trust I have ever seen in my 20 years on this bench." She turned her attention to me, her expression softening for the first time. "Mrs. Holloway, I am profoundly sorry for what you have endured. Your strength and clarity under these horrific circumstances are a testament to your character. You are free to go, and you do so with this court's utmost respect." She banged her gavel, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. "This hearing is adjourned." It was over. I had won. Clara gripped my arm, her knuckles white. Agnes, who was sitting in the gallery behind me, let out a sound that was half sob, half cheer. I just sat there for a moment, letting the words wash over me. Criminal investigation. Utmost respect. It was more than I had dared to hope for. As we packed our briefcases, I saw 2 court bailiffs approach Ethan and Victoria. They spoke to them in low tones, and I knew they were being instructed not to leave the jurisdiction. My son, my child, was now a potential criminal defendant. As he was led from the courtroom, his head bowed in shame, he looked up and our eyes met for a fraction of a second. In them, I saw not remorse, but the terrified, uncomprehending despair of a man who had gambled everything and lost in the most spectacular way imaginable. And I felt nothing, just a vast, empty, quiet peace. The final thread of maternal obligation had been severed. I was truly, finally free. The walk out of the courtroom was a surreal, slow-motion procession through a sea of muted colors and muffled sounds. Clara was on my right, her hand a firm, reassuring presence on my elbow, a silent transfer of her own steely strength into my weary bones. Agnes was on my left, walking with a proud, ramrod-straight posture that defied her years, as if she had personally stared down the opposing counsel and turned him to stone. The air in the hallway, which had earlier seemed thick with the antiseptic smell of floor wax and the tense energy of legal combat, felt suddenly light and clean, as if a window had been thrown open to a fresh breeze. Our path took us past a small, glass-walled conference room where the wreckage of my former family was being temporarily contained. Ethan, Victoria, and their shell-shocked lawyer were being spoken to by 2 court bailiffs. The door was ajar just enough for me to catch a glimpse of Victoria's face. The mask of hateful defiance she had worn in court was gone, shattered into 1,000 pieces. What remained was a ghastly, contorted landscape of pure, unadulterated panic. Her perfectly constructed world, the one built on ambition and entitlement, had just imploded, and the shockwave was still rippling across her features. Ethan was slumped in a chair, his head buried in his hands, his expensive suit looking like a costume on a broken mannequin. He was the very picture of a ruined man. I felt a strange, clinical detachment as I observed the scene. There was no pity, no lingering anger, not even a whisper of the maternal bond that had defined my life for so long. There was only the profound and unsettling peace of a surgeon who has successfully amputated a diseased and gangrenous limb. The procedure had been brutal, the recovery would take time, but the poison was finally, irrevocably gone. I did not slow my pace. I did not look back. To do so would be to invite the infection back in. We didn't speak a word until we were pushed through the heavy courthouse doors and out into the unexpectedly bright winter sunlight. The sudden glare made us all blink. Agnes inhaled the cold, crisp air as if it were the sweetest perfume. "Well," she declared, her voice ringing with satisfaction to the Denver skyline, that was more satisfying than watching the fall of the Berlin Wall on television. Clara laughed, a short, sharp bark of pure professional triumph that startled a nearby pigeon into flight. I have to admit, Margaret, I've had some big wins in my career, but this one is going straight to the top of my highlight reel. She held up a hand, effortlessly hailing a taxi. My treat. Let's get some lunch. Somewhere with strong coffee, stronger whiskey, and absolutely no lawyers. We ended up in a classic old diner a few blocks from the courthouse, the kind of place with worn, red vinyl booths, a jukebox in the corner, and a waitress who called everyone hun. It was blessedly, beautifully normal. The clatter of cutlery, the low hum of conversation, the smell of frying bacon. It was the sound and scent of ordinary life, and it felt like a balm on my soul. We slid into a booth, the three of us, a strange but formidable little tribe, the lioness, the general, and the historian. So what happens now, Clara? Agnes asked after the waitress had taken our orders, her tone that of a keen student demanding a lecture. With the criminal investigation, what are the nuts and bolts of it? Clara methodically added a packet of sugar to her coffee, stirring it with deliberation. The DA's office will receive Judge Vance's referral and the entire case file this afternoon. Given the judge's explicit language, they'll assign it high priority. An investigator, probably from their elder abuse unit, will be assigned. They'll want to take a formal, recorded statement from you, Margaret. They'll also interview Agnes, me, Dr. Petrova, Dr. Ramirez. They'll subpoena the hospital records. In short, they will build a criminal case on the foundation we already constructed. Will he go to prison? The question came out of me before I had consciously formed it, a vestige of a thought from a life that was no longer mine. Clara met my eyes, her expression stripped of legal triumph and full of frank compassion. It's a very real possibility, Margaret. He is a licensed medical professional who used a controlled, mind-altering substance on a vulnerable person for financial gain. That's a trifecta of legal and ethical violations. The courts don't take that lightly. At the very, very least, the State Board of Pharmacy will summarily revoke his license. His career as a pharmacist is over. That much is certain. I processed that information, turning it over in my mind like a smooth, cold stone. Ethan's career, the one I had celebrated, helped pay for, the one that had been a source of such uncomplicated pride for so many years, was gone. And the silence inside me was absolute. The emotional amputation was complete. Good, Agnes said with fierce satisfaction, biting into a dill pickle with a loud crunch. Serves him right. A man who poisons his own mother shouldn't be trusted to dispense cough drops. I looked at these two women, their faces illuminated by the diner's gentle light. Clara, the brilliant legal warrior who had seen my truth and armed me for battle. Agnes, the loyal, eagle-eyed neighbor who had provided the crucial, unshakable intelligence. They, along with Javier and Linda and even the formidable Dr. Petrova, had become my unexpected family. Not a family bound by blood and obligation, but one forged in the crucible of crisis, bound by loyalty, respect, and a shared sense of righteous justice. I can't thank you both enough, I said, and my voice was thick with a genuine, swelling emotion that had been absent for months. You didn't have to do this. You put yourselves in the line of fire for me. They could have come after you too. Nonsense, Agnes sniffed, dabbing at her eyes with a paper napkin. Watching you on that stand today, Margaret, you were magnificent, a lioness defending her life. It was an honor to be in your corner. I agree, Clara said, raising her coffee cup in a toast. To Margaret, the toughest, bravest client I've ever had the privilege to represent. We spent the rest of the lunch talking not about the trial, but about the future. About Agnes's plans to plant a new variety of heirloom tulips she'd ordered from Holland. About Clara's upcoming, much-deserved vacation to the Amalfi Coast. About the nurse's lunch that Linda had invited me to next Tuesday. Life, which had felt like a narrow, dark hallway, was suddenly unfurling before me again, a map of bright, unexplored possibilities. Agnes and I shared a taxi home. As the car pulled into my driveway, she placed her warm, dry hand over mine. You get some rest now, you hear? You've earned it, a deep, long rest. And you call me if you need anything. A cup of sugar, an ear to bend, a partner in crime, anything at all. I walked into my quiet house. The silence was different now. It was not the heavy, waiting silence of the past few weeks, pregnant with dread. It was a deep, peaceful, resonant quiet. The air itself felt cleaner, lighter. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows seemed warmer, more golden. The house was mine again, truly and completely, its spirit cleansed. I made myself a cup of herbal tea and walked into the living room. On the mantelpiece, amongst photos of Arthur and me on our wedding day, of my parents in their youth, of smiling friends from years past, was a heavy, ornate silver frame holding a photograph of Ethan. It was from his pharmacy school graduation. He was beaming, his arm draped proudly around my shoulders, his face full of promise and a future that had not yet been corrupted by greed. I picked up the frame, the silver cool against my fingertips. I looked at the face of the boy I had raised, the young man I had loved with every fiber of my being. I felt a single, faint pang of sorrow, a ghost of an ache, not for the man he had become, but for the bright, smiling boy he had ceased to be. It was a distant, detached sadness, the kind one feels for a character in a book whose story has ended in tragedy. Slowly, deliberately, I turned the frame over and worked the small metal tabs to open the back. I slid the photograph out. The smiling faces felt alien. I walked into my study and opened the small, cedar-lined box where I kept Arthur's love letters and other important papers. I placed the photograph inside, face down. I did not tear it. I did not burn it. I simply put it away. It was a part of my history, an artifact from a life I no longer lived, but it was no longer a part of my present. I closed the lid. A chapter was over. A book was closed. I went back to the living room, leaving the beautiful silver frame on the mantelpiece, empty, polished, and waiting for a new picture, a new memory, a new life. The weeks that followed were a gentle unfolding, like a clenched fist slowly relaxing into an open palm. The absence of threat was a palpable presence in the house. I slept through the night for the first time in what felt like years, a deep, dreamless sleep, and woke to the quiet hum of my own life, not the jarring alert of a soldier on watch. The district attorney's office did call. I met with a sharp, compassionate investigator named Maria Flores. We sat at my kitchen table, and over cups of tea, I told her the story one last time. It was easier this time, less a recounting of trauma and more a formal statement of fact. She recorded it all, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes full of a quiet, human sympathy. She confirmed that charges were being formally filed against both Ethan and Victoria. The wheels of justice were turning, but they were turning on a distant road. It was their story now, not mine. True to her word, Linda called, and on the first Tuesday of the month, I found myself walking into that same downtown diner. This time, the booth was larger, filled with 4 women I had once spent more time with than my own family. Linda, Sarah from pediatrics, and Tom's widow, Alina. The years fell away in a cascade of shared memories and laughter. "Margaret, do you remember that time the hospital CEO tried to cut our overtime?" Sarah recalled, her eyes sparkling. "And you showed up to the board meeting with a 300-page report detailing how it would violate 17 different labor laws." "I seem to recall he turned a very interesting shade of purple," I said with a dry smile. "We called you the Iron Nightingale behind your back, you know," Linda confessed. "With the utmost respect, of course." They didn't ask about Ethan. The news of the investigation was public record now, a small, sad article in the Denver Post. They didn't need to ask. Instead, they enveloped me in the warm, sturdy fabric of their friendship. They talked about their grandchildren, their travels, their ailments, and their joys. They reminded me of a part of myself I had forgot, Margaret the leader, the professional, the friend. By the time I left, my face ached from smiling. I had a community again. My life began to take on a new rhythm, one of my own making. I started volunteering at a local literacy center twice a week, helping adults learn to read. There was a quiet, profound satisfaction in watching a middle-aged man sound out his first complete sentence, his face a mixture of shame and radiant pride. It was a different kind of healing, a different kind of care. These people weren't related to me by blood, but we were connected by a shared purpose. Javier had me in for my 1-month follow-up. My thyroid levels were stabilizing, the tremor was gone, and the fog had completely lifted. "You look 10 years younger, Margaret," he said, looking over my chart with a broad smile. "I feel 20 years younger," I replied. "Javier, I wanted to ask you something. The foundation I'm setting up, I'd like to ask you to serve on the board of directors." He looked genuinely touched. "Margaret, I would be honored." Even the house felt different, lighter. One sunny afternoon, I was in the garden, finally tending to Arthur's neglected roses when Agnes called over the fence. "I have a proposition for you, Margaret," she said, her eyes gleaming with purpose. "I'm almost afraid to ask," I joked. "The city is looking to sell that derelict, overgrown lot at the end of our street, the one that's been an eyesore for years. They want to sell it to a developer to put up more ghastly townhouses." She sniffed with disapproval. I was thinking, what if the neighborhood bought it instead? What if we turned it into a community garden? The idea was a spark, a beautiful, vibrant, growing spark. A community garden, I repeated, the words tasting of sunlight and soil. Exactly, we could have plots for families, a section for the local school, a sensory garden for kids with special needs. We could build a real community hub, not another concrete box. And so began our new campaign. The General and the Historian back in action. We drafted petitions, we organized neighborhood meetings in my living room, we lobbied the city council. I found that the skills I'd honed running a hospital ward, organization, negotiation, and a healthy dose of sheer, unyielding stubbornness were perfectly transferable to civic action. It was exhilarating. One afternoon, as Agnes and I were going over zoning maps at my dining table, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it to find a young man standing on my porch, looking nervous and holding a small, potted orchid. It took me a moment to place him. He was a junior pharmacist who worked at the same pharmacy as Ethan. I'd seen him there a few times. "Mrs. Holloway?" he asked, his voice hesitant. "My name is David. I worked with your son." My guard went up immediately. "What do you want?" I wanted to say something," he stammered, clearly intimidated. "A few months ago, Ethan asked me to look up the contraindications for haloperidol in geriatric patients with hypothyroidism. He said it was for a hypothetical case study. I printed out the information for him. It was a long list. Severe cognitive impairment, extreme motor control issues, risk of coma, it was all there. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but then I read the article in the paper." He looked down at his feet, his face flushed with shame. I should have known. I should have said something. The way he was acting, I'm so sorry. What he did was a disgrace to our profession. He held out the orchid. I just wanted you to know that not all of us are like him. I wanted to apologize on behalf of our profession." I looked at this earnest young man, at his genuine remorse, at the small, beautiful flower he was offering as a token of peace. He was the future of Ethan's profession, a future of ethics and compassion. "Thank you, David," I said, my voice softer than I expected. "I accept your apology." I took the orchid and placed it on the windowsill in the kitchen, where it would catch the morning light. It was a reminder that even in the scorched earth of Ethan's betrayal, something decent and good could still grow. My world was not just expanding, it was repopulating itself with kindness, with purpose, and with hope. The Community Garden Project became my central focus, a joyful, collaborative effort that filled my days with purpose. My house transformed into the unofficial headquarters. The dining room table was perpetually covered in landscape designs and fundraising spreadsheets. The scent of Agnes's strong coffee and the lively chatter of neighbors replaced the sterile silence of the past. We were a motley crew, a retired history teacher, a head nurse, a young architect who lived down the block, a stay-at-home dad with a passion for organic soil. We were building something together, something that would grow and nourish others. It was the antithesis of Ethan and Victoria's destructive greed. We won, of course. Our well-researched, passionately argued proposal to the city council, combined with a petition signed by nearly every resident in the neighborhood, was far more compelling than the developer's slick, soulless presentation. The city agreed to sell us the lot for a nominal fee. The day the news came, we celebrated on my back patio with cheap champagne and Agnes's famous lemon meringue pie, our laughter echoing in the evening air. A few months later, on a crisp autumn Saturday, we had our groundbreaking ceremony. Dozens of families showed up with shovels and work gloves, ready to turn the weed-choked patch of land into a place of beauty. I stood beside Agnes, watching a group of children excitedly staking out a plot for a pumpkin patch, their faces smudged with dirt and joy. "Look at that, Margaret," Agnes said, her voice quiet with emotion. "Just look at what we did." In that moment, a profound sense of peace settled over me, deeper than any I had felt before. This was my legacy. Not a house or a stock portfolio passed down out of obligation, but this. A living, breathing community, a garden built on shared effort and goodwill. This was worth more than any inheritance. It was later that week that the letter arrived. It was not in a crisp, formal envelope from a lawyer. It was a single, flimsy sheet of paper in a plain white envelope, the address written in a shaky, unfamiliar hand. The postmark was from a town in rural eastern Colorado I had never heard of. My first instinct was to throw it away, to not let any tendril of the past snake its way back into my present. But curiosity, a stronger and more persistent instinct, made me open it. The letter was from Ethan. It wasn't a letter demanding forgiveness or protesting his innocence. It was something else entirely. "Mom," it began, the single word looking stark and lonely on the page. "I don't know if you'll even read this. I don't deserve for you to. I'm writing this from the public library. I lost the house. Victoria left me the day after the criminal charges were filed. She took everything that wasn't nailed down and moved in with some real estate developer in Aspen. Her lawyer sent me the divorce papers last week. Good riddance, I guess. It was always about the money. My trial is in 2 months. My public defender says I will almost certainly go to prison. I lost my license, my career, my home, my wife. I have lost everything I thought I valued. But the reason I'm writing is not to tell you that. It's to tell you that in losing everything, I finally understand. I sit here in this dusty little library, and I try to pinpoint the moment it all went wrong, the moment I chose the wrong path. It wasn't just one moment. It was 1,000 small ones. 1,000 little compromises and surrenders to her ambition, to my own weakness and greed. Every time I agreed that we deserved more, every time I stayed silent when she belittled you, every time I chose the easy path over the right one. The poison I gave you, it was just the final step on a long road. I see that now. I poisoned you, but I had been poisoning myself for years. I don't expect you to forgive me. Forgiveness is not possible for what I did. I just wanted you to know, for whatever it's worth, that the boy you raised, the one in that picture from my graduation, is finally, horribly awake. And he is ashamed. He is so profoundly ashamed. And he is sorry. Not because he got caught, but because he did it. Because he broke the most sacred trust there is. I don't know what will happen to me. But I know I will spend whatever is left of my life trying to understand how I became the man who could do that to his own mother. That is my true sentence. Ethan, I read the letter twice, my hand resting on the kitchen table. There were no tears, there was no surge of maternal pity, but there was a flicker of something. A quiet, somber acknowledgement. It was not an apology designed to elicit a response or gain an advantage. It was a confession. A stark, painful, and honest reckoning with the wreckage of his own soul. I folded the letter and put it not in the box with the photograph, but in a separate drawer, one where I kept old recipes and garden plans. It was not a part of my past, nor a part of my future. It was simply a postscript. A final, sad note at the end of a finished story. He was right. Forgiveness was not possible, but in his final, painful honesty, he had perhaps given me the one thing I didn't know I still needed: closure. He was no longer a monster in my mind, but something far more tragic, a man who had finally understood the price of his own choices. And that, as he said, was his sentence to serve, not mine. My life was here, in my sunny kitchen, with the community garden plans on my table and the whole of my future waiting just outside my door. Life settled into a rhythm that was both peaceful and vibrant. The community garden flourished, becoming the true heart of our neighborhood. We hosted potlucks among the tomato vines and held story time for the local children in the shade of a newly planted apple tree. I found a deep, grounding satisfaction in the simple act of plunging my hands into the rich soil, of nurturing something and watching it grow. It was the best kind of medicine. My circle of friends, the Iron Nightingale, Crew, Agnes, Clara, and Javier, became my family. We celebrated birthdays, weathered minor health scares, and debated politics over long, leisurely dinners. It was a family of choice, built not on the tangled roots of obligation, but on the strong, clear branches of mutual respect and genuine affection. I even filled the empty silver frame on my mantelpiece. It now held a sun-drenched photo of me and Agnes, both of us laughing, covered in dirt, holding up a ridiculously oversized zucchini from the garden. About a year after the hearing, I received a call from Maria Flores, the investigator from the DA's office. "Margaret, I'm calling to let you know the verdict came in today," she said, her voice gentle. I took a breath, my hand steady on the receiver. And Ethan was found guilty on all charges. The judge sentenced him to 5 to 7 years in a state correctional facility. With good behavior, he'll likely serve 4. Victoria's case is still pending, but her prospects are not looking good. 4 years, it was a concrete number, a defined span of time. I felt a quiet finality settle over me. "Thank you for letting me know, Maria." "Of course," she said. "I also wanted to tell you, your case has had a real impact. We've seen a significant increase in reporting for elder financial and medical abuse. You gave a lot of people the courage to speak up. The Arthur Holloway Foundation is already becoming a well-known name in our victim advocacy circles." That, more than anything, felt like true victory. The ugly, personal wound they had inflicted had been transformed into a source of strength and protection for others. A few weeks after the call, I was cashing a check at my local bank when I saw a familiar face behind the teller window. It was a young woman, no older than 30, who looked tired and worn down. It took me a moment to place her. She had been with Victoria at the disastrous meeting with the lawyer, Mr. Davies. She was a junior associate at the firm. She recognized me at the same time, and a wave of crimson flushed her cheeks. She finished with her customer and then looked at me, her expression a mixture of fear and something else I couldn't quite read. "Mrs. Holloway," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Can I have a word with you for a moment?" She led me to a small, private office. "I don't expect you to believe me," she began, wringing her hands. "And I'm not making excuses. But I wanted you to know that I quit that firm the day after your hearing. I reported Victoria and Mr. Davies to the state bar for ethical violations." I just listened, my expression neutral. "When Victoria brought us your case, she presented it as a tragedy," the young woman continued, her eyes welling with tears. "A loving daughter trying to save a mother who was lost to dementia. We all believed her. But in the courtroom, when I heard you speak, I saw the truth. I saw what they did. And I saw myself just starting my career, already on the path to becoming someone like them, someone who could justify anything for a win." She took a shaky breath. "My grandmother, she's all I have left. And I looked at you on that stand, so strong and so dignified, and I saw her. And I was so ashamed. So I quit. I'm a bank teller now. It's a big step down, career-wise, but I sleep at night." She finally met my eyes. "I just wanted to thank you. You didn't just save yourself in that courtroom. You saved me too." I looked at this young woman, at her earnest, tear-streaked face. In the wreckage of Victoria's ambition, here was another unexpected shoot of decency. "What is your name?" I asked gently. "It's Sarah," she said. "Well, Sarah," I said, and I heard the warmth of the iron nightingale in my own voice. "It sounds to me like you didn't take a step down. It sounds like you took a step up." I left the bank that day feeling a sense of profound, quiet grace. The ripples of that terrible time were still spreading, but they were no longer ripples of pain. They were ripples of change, of consequence, of a quiet, unassuming goodness pushing back against the dark. That evening, I sat on my back patio, a glass of wine in my hand, watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. The air was cool and clean. I could hear the distant laughter of children playing in the street. The garden was put to bed for the winter, its beds mulched and resting, dreaming of spring. My own life felt much the same, peaceful, content, and full of the promise of future growth. I had faced the greatest betrayal a parent can know and had come out the other side, not broken but stronger. Not bitter but more compassionate. I had lost a son, but I had found a community. I had lost the illusion of unconditional love, but I had found the profound, sustaining power of chosen family and self-respect. The fog was long gone, banished by the clear, unwavering light of truth. I raised my glass to the fading light, to Arthur, to Agnes, to all the unexpected allies who had stood with me. But most of all, I raised it to myself, to the woman who had refused to be erased. To the iron nightingale who had, in the quiet winter of her life, finally, truly learned to sing her own song. And it was a beautiful, defiant, and deeply peaceful sound. 2 springs came and went. The community garden became a local institution, a vibrant tapestry of flowers, vegetables, and human connection. The Arthur Holloway Foundation awarded its first round of scholarships to 3 bright, compassionate nursing students, their thank you letters bringing tears to my eyes. My life was full, not with the high drama of conflict, but with the quiet, steady rhythm of purpose and friendship. One Tuesday, I was having my regular lunch with Linda and the other nurses. We were trading stories about our most difficult patients when Linda suddenly turned to me. "Margaret," she said, her tone serious, "I saw someone last week, at the free clinic where I volunteer. It was Victoria." I felt a jolt, not of fear, but of surprise. It was like hearing a name from a history book, a figure from a past so distant it felt like another life. "She's a patient there," Linda continued, her voice low. "She lost everything, Margaret. After Ethan was convicted, the DA offered her a plea deal to testify against her firm's senior partner, Mr. Davies, in a larger fraud case. She took it, so she avoided prison time, but she was disbarred. Her name is mud in every legal circle in the state. The developer she left Ethan for dropped her the second she became a liability. The clinic's social worker told me she's living in a subsidized apartment and working part-time at a call center. She looks haggard, beaten." I listened, absorbing the information with a strange sense of detachment. There was no satisfaction, no gloating, There was only a quiet, somber sense of an inevitable trajectory. Gravity had simply done its work. Does she still ask about me? I wondered aloud. Linda shook her head. The social worker said she never mentions her family. It's like that part of her life never existed. That, I thought, was the saddest part of all. To have so thoroughly scorched the earth of your own past that you have to pretend it was never there. I went home that afternoon and worked in the garden, my hands in the warm, familiar soil. I thought about the choices we make, the paths we take, and the gardens we end up tending. Ethan was in a sterile prison yard, paying for his weakness. Victoria was in a concrete apartment, paying for her greed. And I was here in my sun-drenched sanctuary, surrounded by life. A few years later, a letter with a prison postmark arrived. It was not a confession this time. It was a single sheet of paper. Mom, it read, I am being released on parole next month. I have a job lined up washing dishes in a diner in Grand Junction. I have a room in a halfway house. I am writing not to ask for anything. I will never ask you for anything again. I am writing to tell you that I am alive and I am trying every day to be a better man than I was. I just thought you should know. Ethan, I read it, and for the first time I felt a faint, delicate stirring of something other than emptiness. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't love. It was a quiet, human acknowledgement of a life that was continuing, a story that had not ended in that courtroom. He was a stranger to me now, a man in a town I would never visit, but he was trying. And for the boy in the photograph, the boy I had once loved so dearly, I was glad. My life continued, rich and full. I traveled with Agnes. I watched Javier's sons grow into fine young men. I saw the foundation I had built in Arthur's name change lives. I found that love, when it is not demanded but earned, when it is not an obligation but a choice, is a far more powerful and enduring force. My name is Margaret Holloway. I am a survivor. I am a gardener. I am a friend. I am a woman who, when faced with the deepest darkness, chose to turn her face toward the sun and grow. Life is not about the wounds we suffer, but about the strength we discover in our healing. It is about the gardens we choose to plant in the aftermath of the storm. And my garden, my life is beautiful, it is thriving, and it is, finally and completely, my own.